He saved a crocodile in Africa. Weeks later, he vanished. And what the crocodile did is shocking. The African sun blazed mercilessly over the Okavango Delta as Dr. Ethan Monroe adjusted his weathered baseball cap and wiped the sweat from his brow. For 3 years, this American conservationist had made the pristine waterways of Botswana his second home, dedicating his life to understanding one of nature's most feared predators, the Nile crocodile. What he didn't know was that his next encounter would challenge everything scientists believed about these ancient reptiles and blur the line between predator and protector in ways that would leave experts speechless. Ethan's journey to this remote corner of Africa began with a childhood fascination that most people would find terrifying. While other kids collected baseball cards, young Ethan was memorizing crocodilian species and their behaviors. His walls were covered with pictures of massive reptiles, and his bookshelves groaned under the weight of herpetology textbooks. His parents thought it was just a phase, but Ethan's passion only intensified with age. By the time he earned his doctorate in wildlife biology from the University of Florida, he had already spent summers working with American alligators in the Everglades and caimans in the Amazon basin. But it was the Nile crocodile that truly captured his imagination. These magnificent predators, unchanged for millions of years, represented the raw power and ancient wisdom of the African continent. When the opportunity arose to join a long-term research project in the Okavango Delta, Ethan didn't hesitate. He packed his life into 2 duffel bags and boarded a plane to Monroe, Botswana, ready to spend years studying these creatures in their natural habitat. The Okavango Delta is a place where time seems to stand still. This massive inland delta, formed where the Okavango River spreads across the Kalahari Desert, creates a labyrinth of channels, lagoons, and islands that support an incredible diversity of wildlife. It's a place where elephants wade through crystal-clear waters, where leopards hunt from the branches of ancient trees, and where crocodiles have ruled the waterways for countless generations. Ethan's research focused on understanding the social behaviors and territorial patterns of adult male Nile crocodiles. These apex predators, which can grow up to 20 feet long and weigh over 1,000 pounds, were once thought to be solitary creatures driven purely by instinct. But Ethan's observations were revealing a more complex picture. He documented instances of cooperation during hunting, territorial negotiations that avoided unnecessary violence, and even what appeared to be mourning behaviors when members of their population died. His methodology was both rigorous and dangerous. Ethan would spend days alone in his specially modified boat, following individual crocodiles and recording their behaviors. He'd learned to read the subtle signs that indicated a crocodile's mood and intentions: the position of their eyes above the water, the angle of their tail, the way they positioned themselves relative to other crocodiles. This knowledge had kept him safe during hundreds of close encounters, earning him a reputation among local guides as someone who could speak to the crocodiles. It was during one of these solitary research expeditions that Ethan's life changed forever. He had been tracking a particular group of males for several days, documenting their interactions around a prime basking site on a remote sandbank. The area was accessible only by navigating through a maze of narrow channels, some so shallow that Ethan had to pole his boat like a traditional Mokoro canoe. As he rounded a bend in one of these channels, something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just another crocodile sunning itself on the bank. But as he drew closer, he realized something was terribly wrong. A young male, probably 8 feet long and in his prime, was thrashing violently in the shallow water near the shore. The animal's distress was immediately apparent. His powerful tail was churning the water into foam, and his jaws were snapping at something Ethan couldn't see. Ethan's heart sank as he recognized the telltale signs of a snare trap. Illegal hunting was an ongoing problem in the Delta, with poachers targeting everything from elephants for their ivory to crocodiles for their valuable skins. These crude but effective traps were often made from aircraft cable or heavy-gauge wire, designed to tighten around an animal's limb as it struggled, causing excruciating pain and often leading to a slow, agonizing death. The crocodile had somehow gotten both of his front legs tangled in the wire, which was anchored to a heavy log buried in the mud. Every movement the animal made only tightened the snare, cutting deeper into his armored hide. Blood was beginning to stain the water around him, and Ethan could see that the wire was already cutting through to the bone on one leg. For most people, the decision would have been simple: call for backup and wait for a professional wildlife rescue team. But Ethan knew that could take days, and this magnificent creature would almost certainly die before help arrived. The nearest ranger station was over 50 miles away, accessible only by boat through treacherous channels. By the time a rescue team could be assembled and navigate to this remote location, they would likely find nothing but bones picked clean by scavengers. Ethan faced an impossible choice. Attempting to free a trapped crocodile alone was beyond dangerous. It was virtually suicidal. Even a smaller crocodile like this one possessed crushing bite force that could easily sever a human arm. Their reflexes were lightning fast, and their thick, armored hide made them nearly invulnerable to anything short of a high-powered rifle. Add to that the animal's obvious distress and pain, which would make it even more unpredictable and aggressive, and the situation became a death trap for any would-be rescuer. But as Ethan watched the magnificent creature struggle against the cruel wire, he knew he couldn't simply turn away. This wasn't just about one crocodile. It was about everything he believed in as a conservationist. These ancient predators had survived the extinction of the dinosaurs, the ice ages, and countless other catastrophes, only to face their greatest threat from human greed and indifference. If someone who had dedicated his life to understanding and protecting these creatures, wouldn't take a risk to save one, then who would? Ethan spent nearly an hour observing the trapped crocodile, studying its behavior and looking for any opportunity to approach safely. The animal was clearly exhausted from its struggles, but far from defeated. Its eyes, those cold, prehistoric orbs that had watched the world change for millions of years, tracked Ethan's every movement with lethal focus. Finally, Ethan made his decision. He carefully maneuvered his boat to the opposite side of the log anchor, putting the heavy piece of wood between himself and the crocodile's snapping jaws. He gathered his tools, heavy-duty wire cutters, a long-handled hook normally used for retrieving research equipment, and a thick wooden pole that he hoped might help keep the animal's head turned away from him. The rescue attempt was a delicate dance between predator and protector. Ethan had to get close enough to cut the wire while staying far enough away to avoid those crushing jaws. The crocodile seemed to sense his intentions, and its struggles intensified as he approached. Several times, Ethan had to retreat when the animal's thrashing brought those massive jaws dangerously close to his position. Working in short bursts, Ethan managed to cut through several strands of the wire mesh that formed the snare. Each cut released some of the pressure on the crocodile's legs, but also seemed to give the animal renewed energy to fight against its bonds. The process was exhausting and nerve-wracking, with Ethan's adrenaline surging every time the crocodile's tail swept close to his position, or when those prehistoric eyes fixed on him with unmistakable predatory intent. After what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 45 minutes, Ethan cut through the final strand, holding the crocodile's right front leg. The animal immediately pulled free and slipped deeper into the water, but the left leg was still entangled in a complex web of wire that had twisted around itself during the creature's struggles. This final phase was the most dangerous yet. The crocodile was now partially free and had regained much of its mobility, but it was still trapped and increasingly agitated. Ethan had to lean further over the water to reach the remaining wire, bringing him within striking distance of an animal that could explode from the water with devastating speed. As he worked on the final strands, something unexpected happened. The crocodile, which had been thrashing and snapping throughout the rescue attempt, suddenly became very still. Its eyes remained fixed on Ethan, but the frantic movement stopped. It was as if the animal had suddenly realized that this strange human was trying to help rather than harm it. With painstaking care, Ethan cut through the last pieces of wire. The moment the crocodile's leg was free, the massive reptile sank beneath the surface and disappeared into the murky water. There was no acknowledgement, no backward glance. The animal simply vanished as if it had never been there at all. Ethan sat back in his boat, his hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. He had just accomplished something that defied every safety protocol and common-sense rule he had ever learned about working with dangerous wildlife. But as he looked at the blood-stained water where the crocodile had been trapped, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He had given this magnificent creature a second chance at life, and that was worth any risk. Over the following days, Ethan continued his research in the area, but he never saw the rescued crocodile again. The delta was vast, with countless channels and hiding places where a crocodile could disappear for weeks or months at a time. Ethan marked the location of the rescue in his research notes and moved on to other areas of his study. But he often found himself thinking about the young male and wondering if it had fully recovered from its ordeal. 3 weeks passed without incident. Ethan had settled into his usual routine of early morning observations, followed by data analysis and equipment maintenance in the afternoon heat. His base camp was a simple but functional setup on a large island in the heart of the delta. A sturdy tent, a solar-powered communication system, research equipment, and enough supplies to last for several weeks between resupply runs. The camp was located on higher ground that rarely flooded, surrounded by mature trees that provided shade and protection from the wind. A small lagoon nearby offered easy access to the main channel system, while the elevated position gave Ethan excellent visibility across the surrounding waterways. It was an ideal location for long-term research, isolated enough to minimize human impact on wildlife behavior, but accessible enough for emergency evacuation if necessary. On this particular morning, Ethan noticed that his usual breakfast companions, a family of vervet monkeys that had grown accustomed to stealing scraps from his camp, were nowhere to be seen. The birds, too, seemed unusually quiet. In the delta, such changes in animal behavior often indicated the presence of a major predator nearby, but Ethan had grown used to sharing his space with lions, leopards, and crocodiles. He made a mental note to be extra cautious, but didn't think much more about it. His research schedule that day called for observing a territorial dispute between 2 large males that had been escalating over the past week. These confrontations were rare and valuable opportunities to document crocodile social behavior. So Ethan was eager to get on the water early. He loaded his equipment into his boat and set off through the narrow channels that connected his camp to the main study area. The morning was perfect for wildlife observation. Calm water, good visibility, and comfortable temperatures before the brutal midday heat set in. Ethan navigated through familiar waterways, his experienced eye automatically scanning for signs of crocodile activity. He had traveled these channels hundreds of times and knew every bend, every shallow spot, every fallen tree that might hide a basking crocodile. But something felt different today. The usual sounds of the delta, the splash of fish jumping, the calls of water birds, the distant trumpeting of elephants, seemed muted. Even the ever-present hum of insects was quieter than normal. Ethan's scientific training told him that these subtle environmental changes were probably meaningless, just natural variations in ecosystem activity. But his survival instincts, honed by years of working alone in dangerous wilderness areas, were sending him different signals. As he approached the area where the territorial dispute was taking place, Ethan slowed his boat and began scanning the water for the two large males he'd been tracking. Crocodile territories in the delta were marked by subtle signs that took years of experience to recognize: scratch marks on trees, specific basking sites, patterns of movement that indicated boundaries. Ethan had mapped the territories of dozens of individuals in this area and could predict their behavior with remarkable accuracy. But today, the usual territorial markers seemed different. There were more crocodiles in the water than he expected, and they were positioned in ways that didn't match their established territorial boundaries. Some of the animals he recognized from previous observations seemed agitated, while others were displaying submissive postures that suggested the presence of a dominant individual nearby. Ethan spent several hours trying to locate the source of this unusual behavior, but the crocodiles remained elusive. Every time he approached a group, they would slip beneath the surface and disappear, only to reappear in a different location minutes later. It was as if they were deliberately avoiding his presence, which was highly unusual. Most of the crocodiles in his study area had grown accustomed to his boat and would typically ignore him unless he approached too closely. As the afternoon heat became unbearable, Ethan decided to return to his camp for data analysis and equipment maintenance. The unusual crocodile behavior would have to remain a mystery for another day. He began the journey back through the winding channels, his mind already focused on the data he had collected and the patterns he might be able to identify in the animals' territorial arrangements. Ethan never made it back to his camp. When the supply boat arrived 3 days later for a scheduled resupply run, the crew found Ethan's campsite exactly as he had left it that morning. His tent was properly secured, his research equipment was neatly organized, and his communication system was functioning normally. There were no signs of struggle, no indication that dangerous animals had invaded the camp, and no evidence of human intruders. But Ethan's boat was missing, and there were strange drag marks leading from the small beach where he normally moored his vessel down to the water's edge. The marks were unlike anything the experienced Delta guides had seen before, too large and oddly shaped to be from a hippopotamus, too regular to be from an elephant, and too deep to be from any of the smaller animals that frequented the area. The local guide who had been working with Ethan's research project took one look at the drag marks and shook his head grimly. "Crocodile," he said simply. "Big one. Very big one." His expression was troubled as he examined the scene more closely. In his 30 years of guiding in the Delta, he had seen the aftermath of crocodile attacks before, but something about this situation felt different. The search began immediately. Every available boat in the area was pressed into service, and experienced trackers were brought in from surrounding communities. The Botswana Department of Wildlife and National Parks launched an official search and rescue operation, deploying aircraft and specialized teams trained in wilderness recovery operations. For 5 days, teams scoured thousands of square miles of channels, lagoons, and islands. They found scattered pieces of Ethan's research equipment, a waterproof notebook here, a damaged radio there, but no sign of the man himself. The search pattern expanded daily as rescue teams explored increasingly remote areas of the Delta, following every possible channel that Ethan might have traveled. The psychological toll on the search teams was enormous. Everyone involved knew that finding a person alive after a crocodile attack was virtually impossible. But they also knew that Ethan was an experienced researcher who understood crocodile behavior better than almost anyone. If anyone could survive an encounter with these apex predators, it would be him. Local communities were divided in their interpretation of events. The older residents, those who remembered the traditional beliefs about crocodiles as spiritual guardians of the waterways, spoke in hushed tones about ancient pacts between humans and reptiles. The younger generation, more influenced by modern education and media portrayals of crocodiles as mindless killing machines, assumed that Ethan had simply become another victim of nature's indifference. But there were also whispers of something else, stories that didn't quite fit the typical pattern of crocodile attacks. Several fishermen reported seeing unusual crocodile behavior in the days following Ethan's disappearance, animals that seemed agitated and restless, moving in patterns that defied their normal territorial instincts. One elderly fisherman claimed to have seen a group of crocodiles swimming in formation, something he had never witnessed in 40 years on the water. On the sixth day of the search, a helicopter pilot spotted something that changed everything. Flying over a remote sandbank nearly 15 miles from Ethan's last known location, the pilot saw what appeared to be a person lying motionless on the sandy shore. But what made the scene truly extraordinary were the 3 large crocodiles positioned around the figure like silent sentinels. The pilot immediately radioed the search command, his voice tight with disbelief as he described what he was seeing. "I've got what looks like a survivor on Sandy Island Delta 7, but there are crocodiles everywhere. They're not moving, just lying there like they're guarding something." The rescue team that arrived by boat 20 minutes later approached the scene with extreme caution. Crocodiles defending territory or a food source were among the most dangerous situations any wildlife professional could encounter, and the team was prepared for a violent confrontation. But as their boat drew closer to the sandbank, the crocodiles made no aggressive moves. They simply watched the approaching humans with those ancient, unreadable eyes. Ethan was barely conscious when the rescue team reached him. Severely dehydrated and weakened by days in the harsh Delta sun, he was barely able to speak. But he was alive, and miraculously, he showed no signs of crocodile attack injuries. No bite marks, no missing limbs, no crush injuries that would have been expected from any aggressive encounter with these powerful predators. As the medical team worked to stabilize Ethan for evacuation, the 3 crocodiles slowly slipped into the water and disappeared. The largest of the 3, a magnificent male that the rescue team estimated at over 12 feet long, was the last to leave. For a long moment, it remained motionless on the edge of the sandbank, its ancient gaze fixed on the unconscious researcher. Then, without any apparent urgency or fear, it too vanished beneath the surface of the delta. The medical evacuation to Monroe Hospital revealed that Ethan was suffering from severe dehydration, exposure and exhaustion, but nothing that couldn't be treated with proper medical care. His physical condition was consistent with someone who had been stranded in the wilderness for several days without adequate water or shelter. But there were no injuries that would explain how he had ended up on that remote sandbank. As Ethan recovered over the following days, he slowly began to piece together the fragmented memories of his ordeal. His recollections were hazy and sometimes contradictory, complicated by the effects of dehydration and psychological trauma. But gradually, an extraordinary story began to emerge. Ethan remembered being in his boat, conducting routine observations when something massive struck the hull from below. The impact was unlike anything he had experienced, not the exploratory bump of a curious hippo or the accidental collision with a submerged log, but a deliberate, controlled contact that seemed almost intentional. His boat had capsized immediately, throwing him into the murky water along with his research equipment. In those first terrifying moments underwater, Ethan was certain he was about to die. He knew that struggling on the surface would only attract more attention from any crocodiles in the area, so he forced himself to remain as still as possible while slowly swimming toward what he hoped was the shore. But instead of the violent attack he expected, something extraordinary happened. As Ethan struggled to reach the surface, he felt something large and powerful moving beneath him in the water, not attacking, not grabbing him with crushing jaws, but actually supporting him, helping to push him toward the surface and then toward the shallow water near the bank. Even in his traumatized state, Ethan recognized the creature that had apparently saved him from drowning. It was the same young male he had freed from the wire snare 3 weeks earlier, now fully healed and significantly larger than Ethan remembered. The distinctive scars on the crocodile's front legs, left by the cruel wire trap, were unmistakable. What followed defied every scientific principle Ethan had learned about crocodile behavior. Instead of attacking this vulnerable human who had fallen into their domain, the crocodile had actually guided him to safety. More incredible still, as Ethan lay exhausted on the muddy bank, trying to process what had just happened, 2 more large crocodiles emerged from the water to join the first. For the next several days, as Ethan drifted in and out of consciousness under the brutal African sun, the 3 crocodiles remained nearby. They didn't approach him directly, but they never moved far from his location either. When other predators approached, and in the delta, there were plenty of animals that would view a helpless human as an easy meal. The crocodiles would position themselves between Ethan and the potential threat. Ethan's clearest memory was of a pride of lions that had discovered his scent and tracked him to the sandbank. As the big cats approached through the shallow water, clearly intent on claiming an easy kill, all 3 crocodiles suddenly erupted from their resting positions and formed a defensive line between the lions and the unconscious researcher. The confrontation was brief but decisive. Faced with 3 massive crocodiles in their own element, the lions retreated to hunt easier prey elsewhere. The scientific community's reaction to Ethan's account was swift and skeptical. Crocodiles were not known for altruistic behavior, and the idea that they would actively protect a human being challenged fundamental assumptions about reptilian intelligence and social behavior. Several prominent herpetologists published papers questioning Ethan's interpretation of events, suggesting that stress and dehydration had caused him to misremember or misinterpret normal crocodile territorial behavior. But Ethan's colleagues who knew him personally found it difficult to dismiss his account entirely. He was a respected researcher with years of experience observing crocodile behavior, and his previous publications had always been models of scientific rigor and objectivity. If anyone was qualified to accurately interpret crocodile behavior, even under extreme circumstances, it was Ethan Monroe. The local communities of the Okavango Delta had a very different reaction to Ethan's story. For them, it confirmed ancient beliefs about the spiritual connection between humans and the natural world. Beliefs that had been passed down through generations but were increasingly dismissed by modern education and scientific thinking. The elders spoke of old agreements between their ancestors and the great crocodiles, pacts that ensured mutual respect and protection as long as both species honored their ancient boundaries. One elderly Bayai fisherman, whose family had lived in the delta for over 200 years, offered a simple explanation that resonated with many locals. The white man saved the crocodile's life, so the crocodile saved his life in return. It is the old way, the way our grandfathers understood. The modern world has forgotten that animals can honor debts just as people do. As Ethan recovered his strength and returned to his research, he found himself fundamentally changed by the experience. His scientific training demanded skepticism about his own memories and interpretations, but he couldn't shake the conviction that something extraordinary had occurred on that remote sandbank. The 3 crocodiles had not just failed to attack him, they had actively protected him from other predators, and remained with him until human rescuers arrived. The implications were staggering. If crocodiles were capable of recognizing individual humans, remembering past interactions, and making complex decisions based on those memories, then everything science thought it knew about reptilian intelligence needed to be reconsidered. These ancient predators might possess cognitive abilities that had been overlooked or dismissed by researchers who were too focused on their role as efficient killing machines. Ethan's subsequent research took on new dimensions as he began documenting instances of complex crocodile behavior that might have been dismissed as coincidence in the past. He found evidence of long-term memory, social cooperation, and even what appeared to be teaching behavior between adult crocodiles and their offspring. His publications began to challenge the scientific orthodoxy about reptilian intelligence, though many of his peers remained skeptical of his more revolutionary conclusions. The story of Ethan Monroe and his crocodile protectors spread far beyond the scientific community. Wildlife documentary filmmakers flocked to the Okavango Delta, hoping to capture evidence of the unusual crocodile behavior that Ethan described. Conservation organizations used his experience to highlight the complex intelligence of predators that were often portrayed as mindless killers, deserving only fear and destruction. But perhaps the most important impact of Ethan's experience was on his own understanding of the relationship between humans and wildlife. He had always been passionate about conservation, but his work had been driven primarily by scientific curiosity and abstract concern for ecosystem preservation. Now, he understood on a visceral level that the animals he studied were not just biological specimens to be catalogued and analyzed. They were intelligent beings capable of memory, emotion, and perhaps even gratitude. The crocodile he had freed from the wire snare had somehow recognized him weeks later and made a conscious decision to return a favor. This wasn't anthropomorphism or wishful thinking. It was a documented interaction between species that challenged fundamental assumptions about the boundaries between human and animal consciousness. Years later, Ethan continued his research in the Okavango Delta, but with a profoundly different perspective on the creatures he studied. He never again encountered the 3 crocodiles that had protected him on that remote sandbank, but he carried their memory with him in every interaction with the wildlife of the delta. His experience had taught him that the ancient waterways held mysteries that science was only beginning to understand, and that sometimes the most important discoveries came not from careful observation and data analysis, but from moments of pure, terrifying, life-changing connection between human and animal consciousness. The debate about what really happened to Ethan Monroe continues to this day. Skeptics point to the lack of photographic evidence and the inherent unreliability of memories formed under extreme stress. Believers see it as proof that the natural world still holds wonders that defy scientific explanation. But for Ethan himself, the truth is simple and undeniable. He saved a crocodile's life, and weeks later, that same crocodile saved his. In the vast, ancient waterways of the Okavango Delta, where time moves differently and old agreements still hold power, such exchanges are not miracles. They are simply the way things have always been for those wise enough to listen to the whispers of the water.